My grandmother had a horrible thing happen. So did yours. So did everybody's and your great grandmother, and on and on. It makes me sad to think of all the stories we have lost in general, but also about the people that we're descended from. I mean, it's amazing to think about. But writing the book had another unexpected side effect, which is to make me much more compassionate, I think, to look at what people go through and that we just take for granted. Again, with my own family, but also in general, as we were discussing a moment ago, I really got to see what society was like when there were no safety nets for people.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss McDonald, founder CEO of Paper Even Books, and I have with us today a super special guest who is launching a brand new book. If you love history, historical fiction, nonfiction, if you love stories of women and farmers and families and North Carolina, you are going to want to stay tuned to hear more about this book. It is called A High Courage. And I have with us today the author, and she is a retired academic, background in business and psychology. And she is here with us today, Miss Gail Piner. Thank you so much for being here with us, Gail.
Hi, Morgan. I'm happy to be here.
I am thrilled that you're here because this is a heck of a book, Gail. And I'm wondering if you can help us just dive right into the book at the very beginning. Who do we get to meet and what's happening?
Okay, so we're on the coast of North Carolina, and Mary is getting ready for the day, and she's 28 years old. We find out quickly she has 6 children, and she's a farm wife, and she has just become a widow. So that's the day that they're going to bury her husband. So he was a farm manager. He managed several farms for the landowner. And she absolutely did not see this coming. It was just before his 40th birthday. He seemed to be healthy, but sudden heart attack. And she is left with 6 children to support. She has a 6th grade education. It's 1928. And career opportunities for women in general, much less someone pushing 30 who has 6 children, are almost non-existent. So she finds out very quickly, immediately following his funeral, that the house that she's lived in for 15 years, that she thought was theirs, belonged to the landowner. And she had always assumed that Tom and she owned it. So she's now not only without a source of income, she has no place to live. So it starts off, she feels completely alone. Obviously, she's devastated by his death. They had a lovely marriage, and she really doesn't know what she's going to do.
Wow. Yes. I mean, we get to dive straight in and we get to go deep very quickly. And we've been talking even before we hit record here about, your desire as the author of this book to bring a real picture of what 1920s life for more of the farming class, not, as we said, not the Biltmores, the manor land owning class, but sort of more normal people, and particularly women's experiences. We have a lot of very strong, vibrant female characters in this book. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us, Gail, a little bit about some of the different characters that we get to meet throughout this story, which has a lot of history behind it too?
Yes, it does. In fact, it has the history that we all know about the Great Depression. Obviously, this is just prior to the Great Depression. In my case, it also has family history because Mary is based on my grandmother. And this is the true story of what happened to her, my mother, her child, and my aunts and uncles as a result of my grandfather's death. So it is a fictionalized account because I was not there in 1928 and 29. I only had what we call the tent poles of the story. I knew the bare bones of what happened. He died, they're homeless. I know that it took 15 months for her to figure out what she was going to do and how things ended. That's all I knew. So I had to, more than anything, writing this book, I felt like a detective. Why did that happen? And what would have happened next? And I know down here, this is going to happen. So what had to have led up to that? And it has so immersed me in my grandmother's life in a way that never happened when she was living, unfortunately. And I have learned so many things, not least of which is everyone who has a relative still living, you need to sit down and you need to start asking questions, because everyone has fascinating stories. My grandmother had a horrible thing happen. So did yours. So did everybody's, and your great grandmother, and on and on. It makes me sad to think of all the stories we have lost in general, but also about the people that we're descended from. I mean, it's amazing to think about. But writing the book had another unexpected side effect, which is to make me much more compassionate, I think, to look at what people go through and that we just take for granted. Again, with my own family, but also in general, as we were discussing a moment ago, I really got to see what society was like when there were no safety nets for people. There was no Social Security. There was no government that was going to step in and take care of these kids and take care of her and send a check, nothing. And she was fortunate in that she did have family and friends who could help up to a point and temporarily. They just weren't financially in a position to do much. But she did have that. But there are people who didn't. And it really made me very, very grateful for how things have changed and to take these things less for granted.
Yeah. And, one of the themes in the book is really what was life like for women? Because, of course, we have Mary, who's a young widow with 6 children to take care of. But also she has girls, too. And so, it's this big question of like, what is it like to be a woman in the early sort of, the first quarter of the 1900s, the first half of the 1900s? And what are some of the themes that you hope to kind of highlight or bring to the attention of readers of A High Courage?
Well, one, and I guess the title gives that away, is the amount of courage that people can have, even though they may not think that they have that capacity. And resilience. Obviously, this is a story of great resilience. That I knew my grandmother as an old woman, so she was already elderly when I was born, and she was vibrant. She had a strong personality. I don't mean in an overbearing way, but when she spoke, people listened. And, of course, I took her for granted. She was my grandmother. But now I look back and think, I just had no idea that she had gone through so much, and she was so stoic about it. There was no, oh, let me tell you my sad story. This horrible thing happened. A bad thing happened, and she got through it, and she went on with her life and made the best of it. A form of resilience, I think, is something that we really need to think about. I don't think she even thought of herself as a survivor. She was very concerned in the beginning of the book. She is very concerned with how she's perceived. And of course, this is me as the author imagining that she was that way, that she wanted to be respected as a good wife, a good mother. And she was concerned when she found herself widowed in my book, that she might make some sort of choice that would make people respect her less.
Mm.
By the end of the book, she's not worried about what people think about her. She has grown, and her main and really only concern is what is best for her children. What can she do? Even if her society thinks she's made an awful choice, she is strong enough to overcome these norms of the time that were expected of women to be obedient, certainly obedient to men. And she had a couple of family members who were very much trying to impose their will on her. And she was terrified of they wanted to take her children, and they were farmers. And this obviously is nothing against farmers. I come from a long line of farmers, but she was afraid they would wind up as unpaid servants working in tobacco fields. They would not be sent to school, she feared. And that part is true. She did believe that. Is it true that they would have been treated that way? I don't know, but I know that she thought so. And that guided her decision. So she had to do things, whereas she was raised to be, as I said, polite and friendly and always smiling. Instead, she had to, stand up and put her foot down and say no. So.
Mm. You did that beautifully, Gail, without giving away the big twist at the end. So if y'all want to meet Mary and the courage that she has and the resilience that she develops and her 6 kids and what happens to everybody, the good news is you can grab a copy of A High Courage today. And because we are launching the book, we want to get the book out to as many new readers as possible. The ebook's actually on promotion right now. So you can go to paperravenbooks.com/A High Courage, all one word. There's a link right next to this video. Click on that link. It'll take you straight over to Amazon. You can grab the ebook while it's on promotion, load it up on your Kindle, get it ready for the weekend. You can grab a physical copy if you prefer to have a book on your nightstand. So that is available for you right now. I recommend you just go ahead and check that out while you're here and while you're listening to us talk about A High Courage right now. And Gail, you had some fun moments as a writer. I mean, I can only imagine, like, this is, it's based on your family history. So there are some personalities that you already kind of know, and you're fictionalizing everything. So you're having to go and do, a lot of research around what might have happened, what would have been reasonable, and then give depth and character to these people to really help the story to come alive in the reader's imagination. What were some of the things that you enjoyed writing about?
I really did have a lot of fun with this. And although it sounds like the overarching story is very depressing, I think you're going to laugh through a lot of this book. There are just a lot of funny family events that happen. The children have interesting personalities. I have to admit, I did get a little bit of enjoyment, perhaps more than a little bit, of writing about my own mother. And one of the things my mother would say to me when I was growing up was she'd shake her head and say, "Oh, Gail, I wish you had a better disposition." It was always said with a sigh, "I wish you had," Southern lady. And so I have my grandmother saying to her in the first chapter, "Celeste, I wish you had a better disposition." And as I wrote that, it was like a light bulb moment. I thought, I am sure my grandmother did say that to her, and that's why she turned around and said it to me. So I poked a little fun at my mom. That was mischievous fun. But I also enjoyed relating some of the things that I learned growing up. For instance, how young girls can find out who they're going to marry. Yes, secrets, 2 different ways, that 2 different little rituals that girls can go through. And my cousins and I simply could not get past the don't laugh requirement. So you have to be very serious while you're doing it. But of course, we thought it was wonderful to think that we could find out who it was we'd marry. But There are parts I loved writing about Otis and Elam, who are Tom, my grandfather's two brothers, who are trying to get these kids to work on their farm. And Otis and Elam, not their real names, by the way, but those are family names. So I have a big debt of gratitude to Ancestry.com, is all I can say. But Otis and Elam were just fun to write about. But it was just, little things. You mentioned research, like, for instance, what kind of phone would they have had? Would they have had a phone? What kind of phone? And I got to, if anyone watching this doesn't know what a party line is, unless you're close to my age, it has nothing to do with the party, okay? But it makes for some interesting moments. And party lines, by the way, still existed when I was a young girl. My grandmother had a party line. So, but
And you never knew who was listening on the other end.
you did not. You did not. But a lot of things that we have just forgotten about. Again, back to the research. What do they call cars back then? In the 1920s, what was a car? We say, oh, I'm going to go get in the car. Some people might say vehicle or the specific type, but in my book, I use motor car because I think that sounds a little, but it's not really accurate. What they called a car at that time was a machine. Go get the machine. And I just thought, that just sounds so bizarre. I mean, I don't think my readers they'll think that, that doesn't sound right. So, but who knew the machine? Thank goodness they changed that. But
that's amazing. Go get the machine.
yes. Also, I got to write about the beach trolley, which is something here in Wilmington, North Carolina, that existed. The only way you could get to Wrightsville Beach was via the beach trolley, which would take you all the way from downtown Wilmington, which is on the coast of, or on the banks of the Cape Fear River, take you across over to Wrightsville. And that was the only way you could get onto Wrightsville Island. And my mother, when she was living with my grandmother in her late teens and early 20s, would take that trolley from Front Street all the way to the beach. And it was just clearly one of her very happiest memories. And she was always talking about the beach trolley. So you can bet I've got the beach trolley. I also wrote a chapter really, about my grandmother's wedding night. I can assure you every moment of that was made up.
You didn't have any details on that.
No, and I don't go into a whole lot of details, but I do go into what it might be like for her to eat in a restaurant for the first time in her life. So it's like, what would that have been like? One of the great things at Wrightsville was the Lumina Pavilion, which was fancier than you can possibly imagine. And it was really, in many ways, a marketing device. The man who owned it also owned the new power company. So he wanted to show what electric lights would look like. And he outlined this 3-story huge pavilion on the water there and all these electrical lights. So much so that sailors could use it as a landmark.
Wow.
And they had a movie screen, a full-size movie screen in the surf. So they showed Charlie Chaplin movies.
Wow. Yes. Amazing. That's one of the things I love about A High Courage, Gail, is that you really bring us so deeply into the scene, the setting, the history, the culture, the difference between what it would have been like to be a farmer and kind of those little glimmer moments of, what that high class life might have been like, or even the difference between being a farmer, like a family farmer, and potentially a tobacco farm worker. That would be such a dramatic difference that you, as the mother of these children, would go to great lengths, to prevent them from having that kind of fate. So you really sink us in deeply into the scene itself, as well as the characters. I mean, each of them has such different personalities, and you really start to, feel for all of these folks and what a dramatic situation they found themselves in. And I mean, there's a nice glimmer of hope that we know from, because you're here with us, that it did kind of turn out, and there's an overall sense of hopefulness.
Yes.
And you bring levity and moments of humor and family time throughout the book too. So
I was just speaking with the third friend. It sounds like I've let everyone read it, but it's not the case. But she was saying, I said, when you think of this book, what, comes to mind? She said, she thought, and she said, well, really, it's such a hopeful book. It's so optimistic. And she said, and she finished it several weeks ago, and she said, I keep thinking about Mary and many of the other characters. She said, I just find myself, falling asleep at night and I'm thinking about them. And when she was reading the book, she said, I go to bed and think, what is Mary, what's going to happen now? This thing just happened. So what is she going to do? So I think that it's very involving. It's easy to relate to Mary as a character, and I think knowing that this was a real person, and I have tried to portray her personality as close to reality as I could. But yeah, I think the humor that comes out in various family members and friends and situations that happen are just make it multi-layered, perhaps. And that's one of the reasons I decided to do an epilogue for the book. I wanted to show, and it's 17 years later, I wanted to at least give a little hint of here's how it turned out. And I wasn't going to do that at first, but I wanted to make sure that the reader understood that, things worked out.
we're
Things,
trying very hard not to spoil the ending for you readers, because Mary has some extremely difficult choices to make, and it's a test of her character and really a strength of her character to make those choices. So you're going to have to go along the ride with Mary to find out what happens and who she becomes as part of all this. So Gail, any words for your readers as they dive into A High Courage?
Well, I hope you enjoy it. I think there's probably going to be a lot more going on than you might expect. And I think you're going to find many of these characters quite lovable, and hopefully a couple that you hiss at. So, not to mention Elam and Otis, by name or anything, but yeah.
We call those characters you love to hate.
Yes, yes. And there's even a romantic element to this book. So there's a a romantic undercurrent going on of a very unexpected nature, I would say.
We are teasing you just a little bit. If you love history, historical fiction, families, women in impossible situations, and finding the courage to go on, some lighthearted humor, some villains that you love to hate in those moments, and a hopeful ending with a little bit of romance undercurrent all the way through, this is a book that you will definitely want to check out. So we recommend y'all go to paperravenbooks.com/A High Courage, all one word. You can also just click the link that's right next to this video, take you over to Amazon. You can grab that ebook while it's on promotion today. Go ahead and dive in, start reading. And of course, you can grab a physical version for your nightstand if you prefer that too. Gail, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so thrilled to introduce A High Courage to everybody. And I'm so appreciative that you had the courage to understand your own family's story and add that depth and bring the history and the heart and the humor to the page and bring it to us in A High Courage. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. All right, y'all go dive in, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.